Guys, we are starting chapter 7 on arrays, and I'm going to share my desktop with you so we can look at the slides. Now, the slides, there are a lot of them, and I'm not going to go through every single slide, and I'm going to have maybe 2 separate videos. We'll see how it goes so they're not too long. But I'll make sure and go over everything that you're going to need for your assignments and the exam. So arrays is something that holds multiple values. It is a variable. It can store from 0 to X number of values. And the values are stored in adjacent memory locations. So it looks something like this. So an array, in this particular instance, you have tests, and here we're telling it that we have 5 integers that we want to allocate for this array. And the array is called tests. And so in this very first element, which is going to be test sub 0, it always starts at a 0. It's going to hold the first test and then test sub 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it holds 5 integers starting at 0, index 0 going to 5. So this is how much memory gets allocated. And this is how we represent how this looks. So integer is the data type. Test is the name of the array. 5 is the number of elements or the size of the array. The size of an array is the total number of bytes allocated for it. The number of elements. So to get the actual total like memory allocation, you're going to take the number of elements times the number of bytes for each element. So in test 5 is an array of 20 bytes, assuming that we have 4 bytes for an integer. So you take the 4, you multiply it times the 5, and that's how many bytes total you get in this array. Inside here, where it tells the size of the array, you can put a name constant. So a constant, like the constant 5. And it says this uses program maintenance when the size of the array needs to be changed. So you would change size in one place versus trying to find wherever the array is declared. So we can do this. We can have a constant and put the constant in here. So this is still an array of 5. So here's the subscripts that I was talking about earlier. This is subscript 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this array here is an array that has 6 elements. Each of these is called an element. 0 to 5 means you have 6 of them. So this is not test sub 5. Test sub 5 would end at 4. That's kind of deceiving there. So the last element of the subscript is n minus 1, where n is the number of elements in the array. So if the number of elements is 5, the last n element is going to be n minus 1, 5 minus 1, which is 4. So it would be 4 if it was the previous example. So here is, so we're going back to tests, the integer tests. And what they're doing here is they're assigning 79, the grade 79, to test of 0. And then they're going to output the 79. They can show that you can input into test sub 1. And here shows that you can add test sub 0 and test sub 1. So you can add whatever's in here and whatever's in test sub 1. So array elements can be used as regular variables just like a variable. You just have to add the subscript just to say which one you're talking about. So let me just show you how we do this in code. So let's say we have int tests and we declare it with, we're going to say this tests array has 5 elements. This is a 5-element array, which means you can have test 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we do test sub 0, and we assign it 100, and we see out test sub 0, we should get the 100. So down here, you'll see 100. Now, let's see what happens if we see out just tests without a subscript. And let's put an inline here. Like today. Okay, so notice you can see down here, if I can make this bigger. So test sub 0 is 100. Test, just the variable test, is a memory location. So the way that this works is that just tests by itself is going to be the memory location of where test sub 0 starts. So test sub 0 starts at this memory location. And then when you say test sub 1, it's adding what the compiler does is it takes a number of bytes. So let's say that this integer is 4 bytes. It adds 4 bytes to this memory location, and that's how we get to the next memory location. So we get it, it does a little math in the background. So the first one, it adds 0 to this memory location, so that just stays like that. But the next memory location, test sub 1, is at 64. And the next memory location is you add another 4. And that's so sequentially you will have the memory locations right next to each other. So test by itself is something, and it's really important because this is how we pass an array to a function. We pass it just tests, which is a pointer. We pass that pointer to the function. And that's going to be a different video. Okay, so we're going to now let's try to do test sub 5. So remember, we don't have access to set, we only have access to test sub 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we do have access, remember, it's adding, and it's going to get a memory location, but we're most likely going to write to a memory location that maybe has another value. And this can cause a lot of problems if nobody sees that you've done something like this. So let's see out test sub 5. And let's see what's in it. Run. So it has nothing, it has 0. But we do get a warning, which is good. And the warning says array index 5 is past the end of the array. So the array contains 5 elements and the bounds are 0 to 4. So we're past the bounds. We can only go to 4. Okay. Now, this array is an array of integers. You're going to have an array of strings, array of doubles, array of Booleans, any data type arrays that you want to have. Okay, going back to this. This just gives you some examples like I just did. Here it's showing you that you can take a variable and use that variable inside where the subscript belongs. And all right, so one fast way and one way that we always want to get data into an array is going to be with a loop. And it's going to be a for loop, because for loops, you know exactly where to start, you know exactly where to end. And so in this program that we have, let's say that I wanted to ask the user to enter five test grades, and I want to read the 5 test grades into this array, and I want to output those. So I'm going to have an array, a for loop. I want my for loop to start at 0 and to end at less than or equal to 4 or less than 5. Okay, either one. Increment by 1. So the first thing I want to do is I want to ask the user to enter a test grade. And I'm going to input that test grade into tests sub x. So why am I doing x? So I'm doing x because x is going to be 0 the first time. So my grade is going to go into test sub 0. Then x is going to change to 1. My grade will go into test 1, test 2, test 3, so on and so forth. Let me, just a second. I want to silence my phone. Okay. So here it inputs all the grades. And so now I want to see what I put into the array. So I'm going to do the same loop. I'm just going to copy and paste it. Make it easy. And I'm going to see out the test grades. The test grades are. And then I want, after each test grade print, I want there to be a space beside each test grade. So I'm going to put a space like that so you can read it. And then I'm going to run the program. So here at the bottom, make it a little bit bigger. It says enter a test grade. So I'm going to enter 90, 96, 98, 97, 90. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it should stop now. And it's going to say the test grades are, oh, silly me. It says the test grades are, the test grades are, the test grades are. So I need to modify this. This is going to go, I don't want this to be said 5 times. So I'm going to put that all by itself up there. And then I'm just going to output the test grades. I think I did all that correctly. Okay, 90, 98, 97, 96, 90. Okay, so now it outputs the grades are, the test grades are 1 time. And then it's going to say 90, 98. So these are the numbers that I entered. It just spits them out back out. So anytime you're working with arrays, you're going to use for loops. Don't do it without for loops. I'm not going to accept it. Don't say like cin test sub 0, cin test sub 1, cin test sub 2. Don't do that. No good. Okay. Use a loop. So default initialization. If you have a global array, all the elements are all elements initialized to 0 by default. So if it's a global array, like anything that's above the main function and it's not inside a function, then automatically everything gets initialized to 0. If it's a local array, all the elements are uninitialized, which means that they might be 0, but they might not be 0. And so you want to make sure that if they're not, that you want to make sure that they're always initialized to 0 before you start doing anything. So how do we do that? So one way that you can initialize it is you can do this. You can put curly braces and actually put test grades inside. You can, for example, this array is an array of months. So automatically they initialize days. I'm sorry, the array's days. They initialize the 12 months to the total number of days that there are in each month. So they didn't have to ask the user, they just entered the values. If you have to ask the user, then you just initialize everything to 0. So if an array is initialized with fewer initial values than the size declared, then the remainder elements are going to be 0. So if you have an array like this one, and array has 5 elements, and you say equals 10, or let's just say 100 because it's a grade, right? And you just initialize one element, then let me show you what happens. So I initialized my first element. So it makes the first one 100 and initializes everything else to 0, which is kind of cool. I can also initialize it with 5 numbers. So everybody's going to start with 100. And then just so you can see that you can put any value, I'm going to put some other values. There you go. And so when I run it, it says the test grades are, and then it's going to give me these test grades that I entered: 100, 100, 100, 90, 99. So that's one way to initialize. So the best thing to do is if you're having the user see into an array, just if it's an integer, just initialize the first one to a 0. Like that, then they all get initialized to 0. Okay, so another thing that you can do is not put a size here. And if you don't put a size, then automatically it will know that this quizzes needs to be a 4-element array. So you must either array size declarator, either use array size declarator or initialization list at array definition. So they're saying either so you could do what we did earlier. So you could do this, you say test sub 5 equals 0 to initialize 1, or you can leave it empty and then have 5 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then now it knows, oh, there's 5 elements. And of course, they're all 0. So it just prints 0 because I've got this code commented out. So it's not going to ask me to enter anything. Okay, the next section talks about no bounds checking in C++. When you use a value as an array subscript, C++ does not check it to make sure it is a valid subscript. In other words, you can use subscripts that are beyond the bounds. You saw me do that earlier. I used a subscript test sub 5. That's beyond the bounds of 0 to 4. It gave me a warning, but it let me run the program. Okay, so that's just something to be really aware of. You have to be very careful because bad things can happen with your program. It will write into test sub 5, and test sub 5 could be a memory location that's holding some other data, and it overwrites that other data. That's just an example. So this is what it said earlier. Using invalid subscripts will corrupt other memory locations. Crashes the program, locks up the computer, and can cause elusive bugs, so bugs that you don't even know like how they're getting there. You're like, what's happening? Why? You know, like there's a bug in something else. And the reason that's happening over here is because over here you're overwriting memory. So they're hard to find. They're bugs that are hard to find. And off by 1 error happens when you use array subscripts that are off by 1. This can happen when you start subscripts at 1 rather than 0. So we always want to start our subscripts at 1. So this is an example of a range-based for loop. So you have data type, range variable, array, and statement. So here's an example of how this is used. So you have int value. So val is going to be the integer that holds our numbers. And then 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So there's 5 elements in the array. The array name is numbers. So this program, doesn't have the output. Hold on 1 second. I'm recording. Okay, so in this example, you have a constant size 5, and we have int numbers 5. So we have an array called numbers. It contains 5 elements from 0 to 4. So here we're going to get the values for the array. So we say integer n%val numbers, enter an integer value, cin val. So this right here will do the same thing as the array that I did earlier, where you have int x equals 0, x is less than 5, x plus plus. And then you index into each one. Same thing here. So here we're just going to see out the numbers in the array. It says you can use the auto keyword with a reference range variable. For example, the code in line 12 through 16 in program 7-12 could have been written like this. Oh, this here is just using auto as far as the data type. So if the numbers are all integers, automatically it knows that that the array is an integer. So you could do that, or you could do this because you know it's an integer. And I don't see anywhere in here where they're using size. I don't know why they declared that, but so this line right here seems to just not be even used anywhere. If you were to use it, you would use it here and you just put size in there. So they're saying, okay, so the range-based for loop can be used in any situation when you need to step through the elements of an array and you do not need to use the element subscripts. So in our example earlier, we really don't need the subscript. So we could do something like this. I don't know that I can copy this code. Let's see if I can. So instead of doing this, because I really don't need the subscript, I'm just getting input and output, then no. So we have test, we have initialize it, we have 5 test scores. So same thing here, instead of putting 5, I'm just going to do this and it's going to define them. It's going to create five of them. We have 4 and I'm going to go ahead and tell it integer. Remember the ampersand gives you the address of the variable. And this one is val. It could be anything. This is just the name of a variable. You could call it val, you call it p, q, whatever. So let me call it something else. I'm going to call it T for test score. And then the name of my array is called tests. And then I would see out, enter a test grade, and see into T. And then for integer T, tests, see out. And then here I'm just going to see out each test grade side by side. Okay. So here I'm entering them. Here's the output. Okay. And we're going to run this. Run. Enter a test grade. So 90, 98, 99, 100, 100. The output, so it outputs 90, 98, 99, 100, 100. Okay. So this is just the variable. This is the name of your array. And then here we use this variable here. Okay. Processing array content. Okay, so here they're showing you if you put the plus operator outside test sub I, you're adding 1 to the test. So if your test score is 90, you're adding 1, so the test score is gonna be 91. But here you're changing the subscript. So your index, let's say your index is 0, you're going to go up to 1. So it's just telling you be careful where you put your plus, plus, and minus signs. Don't try to assign one array to the other. So this doesn't work. Assigning one, if this is an array and this is an array, you cannot assign one array to the other. Instead, you want to just assign each element to the array. So you have to copy each one using a for loop. So the 90 has to be copied to the new array, the next number to the next element, like that. And we always use a for loop to copy arrays. You can display the contents of a character array by sending its name to cout. So if you have char f name like this, you can cout f name. So this is if you define char, if you define something as a char, and you want to assign it a string, then it needs to be an array because chars are typically just 1 byte, but this is Henry has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bytes. So it has to be an array. Printing the contents of an array, we've done that already. Printing the contents of an array, the second way, we've done that already. So let's say that now that I've gathered these test grades, I want to get the average of the grades. And so to do that, as the users enter the test grade, I can say something like total plus equals T. Remember that I have 2 options. I can say total equals total plus T. Right? So if you understand this better, just do that for now until you understand what this is all about. And so I want to cout total here just to see what the total is, the total amount. And I've got to define total because I haven't defined it yet. And I've got to initialize it to 0. Always you have to initialize your accumulators. So I'm going to enter all hundreds, so it's just easy for me to, maybe I'll do 490. It's easy for me to add up. And the output, I forgot to put an end line, but the output is 490. So total has 490 in here. And then I need to have a new line here, slash n. I think that should work. 90, 100. Yeah. So there's the output 490. So that's a sum of the total. And then when I find the average, I just want to take that total and divide it by 5, and that gives me the average. I keep wanting to go to that. So total plus equals val, average equals total divided by the scores. So this is an example of how to find the highest value in an array and the lowest value in an array. So the next video that I do, I'll start with this right here. But for right now, just practice the very basic, which is initializing, creating an array, initializing the array, and then being able to fill the array, put numbers into the array, and then output the array. How do you output the values from the array? Make sure that you enter an example like what I've done up here and practice being able just to do that. Create an integer array, create a float array, so you can enter decimal numbers. try a character array that just where you just enter one character at a time, and see how that goes. Okay, thank you.